Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with Developer University. For more of my training videos for beginners, please visit me at devu.com. So previously we looked at arrays, which allowed us to keep a sequence or a group of related values all packaged together in the same container, in the same bucket. The analogy I've been using up to this point, the same bucket in the computer's memory. And we created an array by first defining the data type and then the number of items that we hope to store in the array surrounded with parentheses. So if I wanted 5 items, I would do dim something and then use parentheses 4 as string, and I would be creating an array of strings in that case. And then once we had the data gathered together inside of an array, then we could iterate through the array and perform other operations on all the items in the array, kind of together as a group. But you recall that I said that once I introduced collections, you would see that they were arrays on steroids, and I almost exclusively use collections over arrays unless I absolutely have to. And I think you'll agree that collections are great whenever you're working with all data types, not just simple data types like your strings and integers, but then also with custom classes like the car class that we've been building ourselves. So the .NET Framework class library will use both arrays and collections depending on what it's trying to do, but you're often going to prefer to use collections because of some of the rich filtering, sorting, and aggregation features that it provides through a feature called LINQ, which stands for Language Integrated Query, which is an innovative feature that was added some years ago to Visual Basic and C# for basically this very purpose. If you're familiar with SQL, the structured query language, then it's going to look a lot like that, or at least it was structured to look like that. And we'll dive into LINQ in the next lesson. But there are essentially a couple of different collections that we want to take a look at in this lesson. We're going to look at lists and dictionaries. And there's probably a dozen additional types of collections we could look at. Each of them have their own superpowers. They're used for very specific situations. However, I personally feel like if you were to understand lists and dictionaries, you'll use them about 95% of the time. So I'm going to introduce these to you, and then you can go off and learn about the other specialized lists and collections that you can use on your own. So suppose that I have a number of cars on my car lot, and I want to work with all of that data, all of the car objects collectively as a group, as opposed to just storing the data about each one of the objects individually. So to get this set up, what I want to do is actually point you to the code that's associated with this lesson. There will be a before folder, and I want you to copy out the understanding collections as a starting point. And if you're going to follow along, let's go to the projects folder and paste that baby in. And now we can open up that project, and we'll both be in the same place here. Okay. So as you can see, this project has 2 different classes: a book class, which I created. It has a title, author, and ISBN property, and then a car class, which only has a make and model property for now. And then you can see here that I've already created 2 instances of car and 1 instance of book. So we'll be able to start typing our code here in about line 17 or 18. But again, back to the example. Suppose that I want to work with all of these cars collectively and put them in essentially and group them together in a collection or an array. I probably will wind up using a collection because of the reasons that I said earlier. It gives me so many additional options here. So what I want to do is start off by talking about a specific type of collection called an array list. And I want to start by talking about it because it's a lot like an array, but it has some added features that are pretty nice. For example, array lists are dynamically sized, so you don't have to say ahead of time how large you want your array to be. You can also add and remove items really easily using some methods. And the other thing about this particular collection is that it'll allow you to put any data type into it. You don't have to specify that it's a specific type, whether string or integer or car. Of course, that's the downside as well. So let's go ahead and get started by creating a new instance of this array list. So I'm going to go dim my array list as new system.collections.ArrayList. All right, now obviously I used its full name. Apparently I didn't need to because it's already been added to the default collection of namespaces. So I can just hit Control period on my keyboard and I can choose the simplify name and just go ahead and remove that. And now we're working with the array list without the full name. All right. So now what I may want to do is go my array list dot add car1 and my array list dot add car2. And then what I can do also is do a for each for each item as car in my array list, and I can do console.writeLine and do item dot, and I can print out either the make or the model. Since it's strongly typed and I know what kind it is, I can say, hey, just print out the make for both of the cars in the array list. All right, and you can see that I get the list here. Now, one of the dangerous things about the array list is that it is so flexible. So what we could do with the array list is actually add that instance of book that I created, or actually it's just B1 is the name of it. I can add that to my array list as well. And when I run the application, I'm going to get an invalid cast exception. In other words, you can't convert a book to a car. So on the third iteration through, I try to take the book and say, this is actually a car, and it says, no, it's not, and it won't let me proceed. All right, so I can easily break my application. Let me see if I can do something here and just remove that. And now I'll try to run the application again. Now I get a different exception. I said, let's not call this a car. Let's just make it an object so that it passes that test. And we're not going to check whether it's a car or something else. However, when I attempted to access the make property of the book, well, there is no make property of the book. And so I get a different exception, missing member exception. So I guess the moral of the story is that the bad news is you can add anything you want to the array list. It's very accepting, which is both good and bad. Now the good news is that I can honestly remove an item as easily as I can add an item to my array by using the remove method, and now the application works again because we both added but then removed that item from the array list. Okay, so I just wanted to show you what's possible. Now I already noted some downsides about the array list. While it is extremely useful and flexible and probably better than an array, the fact that you can put anything inside of it's kind of a problem. So what we want to do is actually use two better collections. They're called generic collections. They're generic because you have to define the type for the collection to make it specific. So let me go ahead and just type in some code and then I'll explain how this works. We'll use a list of T generic collection. So here we go. Dim my list as list of car equals a new list of car. My list dot add car1. My list add car2. And now we can do a for each in my list. Okay, so this is going to require a little explanation. Let me just make sure it works, and it does. What is this list of car? Well, its formal name is list of T, where T represents a data type, any data type that you want to make it specialized. So in other words, it's a generic collection, but we're making the generic collection specific by saying it can only be a list of cars and nothing else. So you'll remember that I was able to break my application at runtime, but it passed at compile time by adding a book, B1. But this time, we're going to get an error whenever we try to add the book to our generic collection, our list of car, because value of type book cannot be converted to car. All right, so it's better to catch these things while we're doing our software development. And by using a generic list, in this case, a list of car, we're narrowly defining the collection and saying it can only work with car, so don't try to add anything else to it. Generally speaking, whenever you're working with data in software development, being very restrictive is better than being unrestrictive. Now, some people would disagree with that and say, for example, JavaScript allows you to be very dynamic, but then again, a lot of people shoot themselves in the foot with JavaScript. Whereas with C#, you're going to get those compilation errors ahead of time if you are putting those restrictions on your types up front, okay? And that's what we're doing here. So now let me show you one more type of collection. Generic collection is called a dictionary. And think about a dictionary that you're familiar with, like Webster's dictionary. You have a word that you need a definition for, so you go and you turn the pages until you find the word, and then next to the word is usually a sentence or a paragraph that explain or is associated with that word, okay? And that's the idea of a dictionary. The same thing is true here. You're going to have a collection that'll have a key. In this case, in the case of the Webster's dictionary, the key would be the term that we're looking up, and then the value would be the definition itself, which would be the sentence or paragraph explaining the key. So we can create that same sort of situation by creating a dictionary. So here we'll go dim my dictionary as new dictionary of car. Whoops, I got to give it two things. I have to give it, first of all, T key and then T value. So the type of the key. And so in this case, I'm going to use a string as the key, and then I'm going to give the type of the value, which will be a car. So we're going to give our dictionary, whenever we create a new item in our dictionary, we're going to give it two things. First of all, we'll give it the key, which will be the car, so car1.make. And then we'll give it the actual car1 itself. So now we can find any item, any car in our list of cars by merely using the make. So here we'll go mydictionary.add car2.make and then car2. All right. And so let's go ahead and go console.writeLine. And let's look up my dictionary, and we'll look up I think, what do we have here? We have the geo prism. Okay, so we'll look up the geo, and then we can get to its make or its model, like so. All right, so I can index into the dictionary by supplying the make, which is the key, to get a specific instance of the entire object. All right. So let's go ahead and run the application. And you can see that now we find that the prism is the model because geo is the make. All right. Very cool. Now we can attempt to go mydictionary.add and we can go ahead and give it b1.author as a key, and then attempt to give it the book itself as the actual object that it'll be saving in the dictionary. However, we're going to get an error. The value of type book cannot be converted to car. So while author is a string and it would probably pass, unfortunately, or fortunately rather, the book is not of type car and it cannot be added. So it's restrictive, and that's a good thing because we catch those kind of problems while we're writing our code. Very nice. Okay, so moving on from there, we've got two generic collections we can work with, the list of T and the dictionary of T key, T value. Let's talk about object and collection initializers. So did you remember from before where we did this? Dim names as string equal to, and then I gave it, I think, Eddie and Alex and David Lee and Michael. All right, and then we were able to now, in one line of code, both create and initialize our array. Well, you can do the same thing with objects and with collections of objects. So here we'll create a new car. So let's do this. Dim my car as new car. All right. And then I can use the with keyword. And I can just do this. Dot make equals, let's make this a BMW. And then dot model equals 745 Li. Okay? Now I've created a new instance of the car object and populated its properties, all without the use of a constructor like we did previously when we were looking at creating constructor methods. I'm able to create an object and initialize it all in one line of code. Looks very similar to what we did with arrays, right? Very cool. All right, and then to kind of top it all off, I can use the same kind of process to create many instances of car and add them all to a new list of car, all in one line of code. Even though it'll be separated on different lines, it's essentially one instruction that we're passing into Visual Basic. So here we go. Dim my list of cars as new list of car. All right, so that's the first part. Now we're going to use the from keyword, from, and then opening and closing curly braces. And I'm going to go ahead and just make some room for myself here and then use my arrow keys to kind of navigate around. New car with, and here we'll go, make equals Aston Martin, and model equals DB9. Then I'm going to use go to the end of that object initializer and go to the next line and create another new car with dot make equals Audi dot model equals the A8 comma new car with dot make equals a Dodge, and then dot model equals the Dart. Okay. All right, so then at the very end, we'll just go ahead and collapse those last two curly braces. So it can start getting confusing because, you know, what curly brace belongs with what curly brace, but typically what happens is if you select one, you'll see that it's slightly grayed out and it'll show you its corresponding opening or closing curly brace by giving it a little gray background as well. So whichever one you've got selected, it will show you its corresponding beginning or ending curly brace by highlighting it in light gray color. Okay, but essentially this is one line of code. Now what we can do is we can for each our way through for each item as car in my list of cars. And here we'll go console.write line. We'll just go item.make or model. Actually, we'll do item.model. Let's go ahead and save it and run the application. And you can see there are the three models of cars. And essentially, we were able to, in one line of code, create a new list of car and then create three new car objects and add them in to initialize that collection with new instances of the car object as well, all in one shot. Wow, that's pretty crazy, right? So at any rate, that's all I really wanted to tell you about. Let's recap what we talked about in this lesson. We talked about collections, both generic collections and non-generic collections. We talked about why you want to use a collection, especially a generic collection. Then we talked about the list of T and the dictionary of T key, T value, how to create those, why they're better than just your normal collections, because they enforce types and so they restrict the types that can be used inside of the collection, which means we can catch errors since it's strongly typed at compile time rather at runtime. Then we looked at an object initializer here, and then we looked at a collection initializer here. All right, and next up what we're going to be able to do is use the LINQ extension methods and the LINQ language in order to filter and sort and group our collections. And so that's one of the reasons why you'd want to use collections over arrays when you're working with lots of data. And so we'll do that in the next lesson. We'll see you there. Thanks.